From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. Alongside Kaylee Lyons, I'm Joe Matthew.
We have a deal. Congressional leaders reached an agreement on a government funding stopgap, a fourth continuing resolution that would kick the can to new deadlines of March 8th and 22nd. Republican Congressman Ralph Norman of South Carolina will be with us for more.
Mitch McConnell will step down as the Senate's Republican leader in November, saying today it's time for the next generation of leadership after his record-setting tenure. We'll reflect on that news with a member of his conference, Republican Senator Bill Hagerty of Tennessee.
And lessons from Michigan. Both parties' frontrunners win their primaries, but more than 100,000 Democratic voters choose uncommitted over President Biden, and roughly 30% of Republicans don't pick Trump. And on the subject of former President Donald Trump, we do have news at this moment from the Supreme Court. The High Court in the United States will do as Trump requested. They will weigh Trump's immunity case, where he says he is immune from prosecution, the prosecution brought by Jack Smith here in Washington related to 2020 election interference. They keep his trial here in D.C., originally slated to begin next week on March 4th, on hold. The Supreme Court will hear Trump immunity arguments in April, Joe.
Yep, this is just crossing the terminal right now, Kaylee, and important. We've been waiting for this news for weeks now, with a trial that was originally set to begin next week. It has, of course, been pushed back indefinitely here. And now if they're going to be hearing this argument in April, Kaylee, it makes you wonder how quickly that trial, if allowed to proceed, could begin and whether it could happen before the election.
Absolutely right. We know that at the end of March, March 25th, is when the trial in the state of New York is set to begin. Unclear, though, when this trial here in Washington could begin. If the arguments are heard in April, there's no telling exactly when the Supreme Court may actually make a ruling on immunity.
Exactly.
And theoretically, this trial cannot be rescheduled until that has closed as a legal question. So, of course, we'll have more on that later this hour.
Absolutely. The Supreme Court making news as we start this edition of Balance of Power, and a show that is full of breaking news. And joining us now, Bloomberg's Megan Scully, Nia-Malika Henderson, and Gregory Cordy to walk through the rest of our top stories, all of which would be lead stories on any other day. Megan, I'll start with you with news from Capitol Hill. We have a deal, this breaking less than an hour ago, to keep the government from shutting down beginning on Friday. It's exactly what Speaker Mike Johnson vowed not to do, a continuing resolution. This will basically kick the can for 2 weeks, but it does come with an agreement to actually get some spending bills passed. What do you know about it?
It's about 6 of the spending bills. So, and some of the lesser of the controversial ones. The Defense Department's not in there. The Department of Justice isn't in there. But we are hearing now it is in there that the Commerce, Justice, Science bill will be included. It is essentially a full-year spending bill, but it takes time to get those through both chambers. So what they're saying is we're going to put this Band-Aid out there to keep the government open, to keep the agencies that would have shut down on Saturday open while we deliberate this deal. But the deal is a very positive sign for these government agencies that will remain open. Still to be debated, though, are those other agencies that would now shut down on March 22nd.
Well, what's remarkable about this, Megan, is even if it's only kicking the can down the road another additional week for this first batch of bills, it still is a kick of the can for the fourth time. When Mike Johnson has said he didn't want to do any more CRs, just before the House's recess, the majority whip, Tom Emmer, told Joe and I there will not be another CR that passes with the support of this Republican conference. Can Mike Johnson actually get this across the line?
It's going to be interesting to watch how this happens. He's, first of all, going to have to violate what is called the 72-hour rule,
right.
Essentially, that they sit on a piece of legislation to give everyone the opportunity to read it. Nobody actually reads the legislation, but it allows people at least time to write amendments and to make hay about this, that, or the other thing. So right off the bat, he's already going to draw some opposition from members of his caucus. It's going to need some Democratic support to get through. Where it gets trickier on these procedural votes, these votes to actually bring it to the floor, and how he handles that will be key, whether they bring it to the floor under regular order or whether they bring it to the floor expeditiously, something that would require 2/3 majority.
All right, Megan Scully, who leads our congressional coverage here at Bloomberg. It's been a really fun day for you. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. And it's been a fun day for Megan, not just because of the progress on funding, but because of another major story in Congress today. Kentucky Republican Mitch McConnell, the Senate Minority Leader, announcing plans to step down as his party's leader in the Senate after the November election, after an historic more than 17-year-long tenure. He spoke on the Senate floor earlier.
One of life's most underappreciated talents is to know when it's time to move on to life's next chapter. So I stand before you today, Mr. President, and my colleagues, to say this will be my last term as Republican leader of the Senate.
Joining us now for more is Nia-Malika Henderson of Bloomberg Opinion, who actually now has a new opinion column out on the Terminal and online entitled "McConnell Has No Place in Trump's Party." Nia, you right here, Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell saw the writing on the wall. He has no place in this Republican Party. It belongs to Donald Trump. Is that what this is a reflection of?
Listen, I think that is mainly what it's a reflection of. You know, in his speech, he sounded very sad. He sounded very wistful. He sounded like an elderly man. He talked about how old he is, and that's certainly part of it, too. And, of course, he's had some bouts with illness as well over the last year. So that's part of it. But it is also that you can't imagine that Trump would have Mitch McConnell to be the head of the Senate Republican caucus were he to be reelected. So I think he's sort of bowing to that reality, right? That this is a party that is not the party he joined, which is all about Reagan and Reaganism and sort of a bold foreign policy and what some people might call a sort of interventionalist approach to foreign policy. It's a very different party now. And so he, I think, is recognizing that and leaving now and recognizing that, as Matt Gaetz said, right, he tweeted about this, that this is going to be a different Republican Party. And Matt Gaetz in a tweet essentially said, listen, we've ousted Mitch McConnell, we've ousted McCarthy, we've ousted Ronna McDaniel, who's, of course, at the RNC, and so this is a different time.
That's for sure. He said today he would continue serving Kentucky, just in a different seat.
Right.
Kind of like Nancy Pelosi. Mm-hmm. What compels these veteran lawmakers to stay around and wait in line in the cafeteria like everybody else?
Listen, these people have huge sort of staffs, and it's prestigious, and, you know, they have sort of an entourage. And so sort of the trappings of power, right, are sort of hard to give up. I think in listening to Mitch McConnell today, it's hard to imagine that this is a man that's going to stay around to the end of his term. I think it's like 2026. He certainly is not going to run for re-election. But that is what he said today. And obviously Speaker Pelosi, or I guess it's Speaker Emeritus Pelosi, is hanging around. But listen, it's time for a new generation. That's what Mitch McConnell said. And it is a different Republican Party.
Well, and with that in mind, Nia, we talk often here in Washington about the three Johns, Cornyn, Barrasso, Thune, who, of course, is the whip for the Republicans in the Senate right now. Would they be reflective of this new Republican Party if they were to be leader? Or is there going to be someone like Rick Scott, who the House Freedom Caucus has endorsed?
Yeah, listen, I think we'll have to see what Trump thinks, right? I mean, and one of the things you've also seen, I think, among Republicans is that they sort of fall in line with Donald Trump. They might not start off as sort of the MAGA wing of the Republican Party and the Trump wing, but they sort of molded themselves to stay relevant. Lindsey Graham, for instance, comes to mind, right? He used to be BFFs with John McCain. He's now BFFs with Donald Trump, who is a diametrically opposed idea of what America should be, of how you should behave in leadership. And so we'll see. Donald Trump, I'm sure, will weigh in. He'd been sort of waiting on an endorsement from Mitch McConnell. In many ways, he doesn't need it. He seems to be barreling his way to the nomination and perhaps back to the White House.
Really glad you could be with us today. Right. Looking for Nia's column, as Kaylee said, on the Terminal and online. Nia-Malika Henderson writing for Bloomberg Opinion. Elsewhere, President Biden and former President Trump easily won their party's primaries in Michigan yesterday, but some signs of turmoil emerging for both men. And joining us now for more on that, Bloomberg's Gregory Cordy. There was a big question, Gregory. Let's start with Joe Biden about how many uncommitted votes he might get due to discord from Arab and Muslim American voters a big part of the Democratic population, voting population in Michigan. He got 100,000 uncommitted votes. And it broke down to not the best score for the president of the United States. 81% for Biden, 13% uncommitted. What does he take from that?
Yeah, you'd never want to lose votes to a candidate that doesn't even have a name, right? And that's what happened here. And it's a quirk of Michigan primary politics that it does allow voters in each party to vote for uncommitted, which basically means that they'll still send delegates to the Democratic National Convention in this case, but that those delegates won't be honor bound to vote for Joe Biden on the first ballot. I suspect they still will vote for Joe Biden on the first ballot if he's the presumptive nominee. And so this is really a protest vote. And what you saw in the primary last night was mostly college towns, Ann Arbor, East Lansing, Kalamazoo, with elevated numbers of people voting for uncommitted. And that reflects the youth vote, and also in Dearborn, the suburb of Detroit, with a large Arab American, Muslim American population, a lot of anxiety, a lot of frustration about the Biden administration policy towards Israel and Gaza. And that's what was reflected in that vote.
And then on the other side of the party, or the other party, if you will, Gregory, former President Trump got 70%, roughly 30% of Republican primary voters, even with the knowledge that he very likely was going to be the Republican nominee, chose not to vote for him, voting for Nikki Haley to the tune of about 28%. And especially in light of the breaking news we received at the top of the hour, the idea that the Supreme Court is now going to be weighing the immunity question, whether or not he can be prosecuted here in Washington, go to trial maybe at some point before the election. He'll be at trial in New York at the end of March. How is that likely to factor in as he moves forward to what at this point looks like a highly likely general election contest between him and Biden?
Everything we're seeing in the polls of Republican voters shows that they stand behind him on all of those legal issues. And there's nothing, I think, that would suggest that that would change going forward. And as a matter of fact, he seems to be just gaining steam. But we did see in Michigan last night, 26% of Republicans, compare that against the 13% of Democrats that we just talked about who voted for uncommitted. 26% of Republicans voted for Nikki Haley. And that's not nothing. She's overperforming in every state that she's been in so far. She's getting incrementally a number of delegates, not nearly enough to win the nomination, but enough to show that there is a significant percentage of the Republican Party who's looking for an alternative to both Trump and Biden, but who really can't find a candidate.
All right, Bloomberg's Gregory Cordy, thank you so much for joining us. Now, coming up, we're going to go live to Capitol Hill. Republican Senator Bill Hagerty of Tennessee will be with us to reflect on Senator Mitch McConnell, the funding deal that has been just struck this evening, and more. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
Believe me, I know the politics within my party at this particular moment in time. I have many faults. Misunderstanding politics is not one of them. That said, I believe more strongly than ever that America's global leadership is essential to preserving the shining city on a hill that Ronald Reagan discussed.
Senator Mitch McConnell on the Senate floor in an at times emotional address just after 12:30 Eastern this afternoon, making it clear he would leave his post as the longest serving Senate leader come November. Let's bring in Tennessee Senator Bill Hagerty, a member of Mitch McConnell's caucus. Senator, it's good to see you this evening. There's a lot of talk about what comes next, even as you reflect on the record tenure of Mitch McConnell. Would you rule out running for the leadership position yourself in November?
That's something that I've never considered, Joe. I think you know this. I've never even run for any office except one, and that was U.S. Senate 3 years ago. I never even ran for student government when I was a kid. So politics is not why I'm here. I'm here to actually make a difference. And I think we've got great leaders in the Republican Party. This is something that will sort itself out, I think, very soon. Leader McConnell's had a great, long career here in the United States Senate, the longest serving leader, as you mentioned. And he's got a lot to point to. If you think about his success during the Trump administration, seating 3 Supreme Court justices, his impact on the federal judiciary will be longstanding and very positive for the nation. And he's come to the decision that the time has come to change. I appreciate that, appreciate his leadership, and we will sort through the leadership of our conference here in short order.
So, sir, if not you, who would be best to lead?
As I say, they're terrific leaders in the Republican side. I think everybody's got to think that through on their own. And my hope is that everybody that is interested in this will have a chance to speak with all of us. It's a process that, again, I'm not familiar with. I haven't seen this process unfold since I've been serving the United States Senate. But it's one that I have every confidence that we'll have a great set of candidates emerge, a great leader emerge as our next Republican leader here in the United States Senate.
Senator McConnell, of course, referred to his age in his address today and spoke to his affinity for Ronald Reagan and the inspiration that he got from the former president is the reason why he got into politics. He said, Senator, there's been a lot of analysis on why now, a lot of questions about why Mitch McConnell is doing this now. And many folks said beyond his age that it's the influence of Donald Trump, that it's a party that has left Mitch McConnell. Are they right?
Well, what the leader actually said today was he lost his sister-in-law. I know Angela. He said it was a time to pause and to reflect. And I accept that at face value. I think it was a chance for the leader to reflect on his life, what he's accomplished. And he said that he's at a point in life where he's ready to make a change, and he thinks it's the right time for our party and our conference here to make that change. I respect it, and I will take him at his word.
Speaking of timing, Senator, it's also interesting that this is happening amid the funding fight we are seeing on Capitol Hill, the race to avert a partial government shutdown that could begin at the end of the day Friday. But we now have a statement out from congressional leadership. There has been an agreement, 6 bills. First up, another 6 that will expire on March 22nd now. The first batch now March 8th. So we're kicking the can down the road again, it seems. Are you confident that this will pass? I thought we were doing no more CRs.
Well, I've heard the same thing that you have. As you know, I serve on the Appropriations Committee here in the United States Senate. I've never seen a process mismanaged as much as this since I've been here. We worked our way through all 12 appropriations bills and passed them to the floor last July. Since that time, Chuck Schumer's only brought 3 of those bills to bear, but those bills aren't perfect. They were as conservative a product as we could move through the Senate in a Democrat-controlled Senate, but my hope was to get them out and get them over to the House so that the Republicans there could begin to work on and improve those bills. We still haven't seen the text and the final work product from all of that. So I'm hopeful that we'll see the text in a few days. The CR, I haven't seen the text of that either to know what's going to be in it. But it looks to me, and it's unfolding this way, that there will be a short-term CR proposed sometime tomorrow that would take us, just as you mentioned, a few weeks into March to give time to work through these first 6 bills. And as I said, there's 6 more that are awaiting work to be done on them, and I'm sure that the staffs will be working around the clock trying to get those ready as well. But the fact that we're here at the last hour, at the last minute, continuing to bump up against funding crisis after funding crisis, this is a choice that's been taken by the Senate Majority Leader, Chuck Schumer. He seems to want these massive omnibus bills and these crises that he likes to manage between. But this is certainly no way to run a railroad in my standpoint, from my standpoint.
I have to ask you as well, Senator, about the supplemental emergency funding bill that the Senate passed and we're told is DOA in the House. This would bring funding, of course, to Ukraine, Israel, and Taiwan, along with a border deal that I know you were not satisfied with. We talked to you right around the time that deal was struck. Knowing your feelings about the border, we're hearing from some members of the Republican Party in the Senate who are becoming more vocal about the need to fund Ukraine. Tom Tillis told Bloomberg, if Putin wins, Republicans will lose. Do you worry? I know your feelings about the border, at the same time about the political implications of what could be a lost war for Ukraine.
Well, Joe, my feelings about the border have gotten even stronger since I was down there last week. It's a total catastrophe there. We have got to do something to secure our nation's border, and I think the American public is speaking up loud and clear that they expect that to be taken care of before we turn our attention to other situations. To Ukraine. Here's the situation in Ukraine, and it's something that I think is quite regrettable. The Biden administration has done a number of things that led Vladimir Putin to have the confidence to do this. Afghanistan, probably the gravest mistake that we've seen. But Plan A for the Biden administration, if you recall, after the invasion took place, and this is after I was calling on imposing sanctions on Russia before any invasion, to demonstrate to Putin that we were serious, that we meant business, that this was not going to be like 2014 in Crimea. What happens after Russia invades? President Biden gets on the phone to Zelensky and offers him a ride home. That was Plan A of the Biden administration, was to completely cede Ukraine to the Russians. When Zelensky said, no, I don't want to ride home, I want support, President Biden was silent at that point. It took the Russian premier, Olaf Scholz, to step up and say, perhaps we should help. It took the American public actually saying, you know what, we're inspired by Zelensky's words. But Joe Biden was not in a position, nor was he willing.
Joe Biden's support for Ukraine, is he? I mean, some would argue he's politically on
but I'm putting it in
based on the support that he's put behind President Zelensky.
Let me put it into perspective and put the timing into place. Joe Biden comes back to the U.S. Senate with a Plan B. They cobbled together a $40+ billion package that they didn't let us see and have time to evaluate. Over half of it going to be humanitarian aid. And I asked, what's the plan to win? When you're a smaller competitor like Ukraine going up against a much larger competitor like Russia, there needs to be overwhelming force at the beginning. No plan to win, as long as it takes.
So is Tom Tillis wrong
what we found ourselves in
is because of this delay?
Well, I think the Biden administration has put Ukraine on a path to find itself in a war of attrition. In a war of attrition, a smaller player has very little chance.
Fingerprints on this as well, aren't there, Senator?
There certainly are plenty of blame to go around at this point, but I want to go back to the origin here, and that is demonstrated weakness to Vladimir Putin, whether it be the waiver of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline sanctions, allowing Russian hackers to hit the Colonial Pipeline and having no consequence for that, extending the New START treaty, which encompasses 92% of our nuclear arsenal and only half of Russia's, not making any changes and giving him a 5-year extension. We have demonstrated weakness to Putin. He's been emboldened, and that has come squarely from Joe Biden and this administration.
Well, and to return to the issue of the border, it's worth noting President Biden will be at the border in Texas tomorrow, as you yourself were just days ago. There was reporting in the last week that the president was considering executive action on the border. The House Speaker said that's just election year gimmicks. But is that not something Republicans have been pushing for him to do? What would you like to see the president announce tomorrow while he's down there?
Absolutely, this is what Republicans have been pushing for, and I want to see action. This is one of the reasons that I have been going to the border. This is one of the reasons why I've been talking about it with you and Joe. I want the American public to understand, and I want to put pressure on the situation to try to address it at the border. Joe Biden, by his own admission, has the executive authority to do a lot. President Trump had brought us to a position where the border was as secure as we've seen it. And President Biden came in with executive orders and undid everything that President Trump had done, the very successful migrant protection protocols, the so-called Remain in Mexico policies, catch and release, reinstating that, doing away with Title 42, stopping the building of the wall. All of these things can be I think Joe Biden's going to take a hard look at this, but he needs to restart them. He needs to look back at the policies that work. I hope he will learn from this, and I hope that we see something positive coming from Joe Biden at the border tomorrow. I know that President Trump will be at the border as well, a little bit further away at Eagle Pass. This is where I was last week. I know President Trump will be calling this out. The American public are very focused on it right now. Joe Biden has an opportunity to step up and go back to policies that were working.
Well, I know you've been focused very much on border policy, Senator. It's also worth noting that recently you, along with Senator Ted Cruz and others, have put forward legislation that would prevent a CBDC, a central bank digital currency, being developed here in the United States. But just in the month of February, you've had the Federal Reserve Governor Christopher Waller say there is no reason for a CBDC because the U.S. banking system works well. The Cleveland Fed President Loretta Mester said they will not create a CBDC unless asked by Congress. Why is this legislation needed now? It doesn't really seem like we're close to one, sir.
I think there's growing concern and a lot of work that's been underway at the Fed and other places moving in this direction. We've certainly seen China do it. And what I don't want to see is another opportunity for Operation Choke Point to manifest itself into our payment system. We have a private sector answer to this in stablecoins, a decentralized solution to this. We do not need a centralized bank digital currency, and we need to put the talk of this to the side.
All right, Senator Bill Hagerty, the Republican from Tennessee and a member of the Senate Banking Committee, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
We appreciate your time. Now, coming up, we'll be joined by another Republican in the other chamber, Representative Ralph Norman of South Carolina, as we have news this evening of a funding deal that would require another continuing resolution be passed to kick the can to March 8th or 22nd. The House Freedom Caucus did not want another short-term CR, so we'll get the reaction from the congressman coming up next, as well as discussing Nikki Haley, who he has endorsed in 2024 but was resoundingly defeated in Michigan, a fifth state, against former President Trump last evening. So stay tuned for that conversation on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
You're not going to get another continuing resolution. You're going to have to get these things passed, and they're talking about you won't have time to do 12 individual bills. They're talking about doing them in something called minibuses, maybe 3 or 4, where you put 3 or 4 bills in each one and pass them as a group.
That was Congressman Tom Emmer of Minnesota, the House Majority Whip, speaking to us on February 15th. And now on February 28th, what do we have but news of another continuing resolution? Joining us now is Republican Representative Ralph Norman of South Carolina to reflect on this. So, Congressman, thank you very much for your time this evening. Of course, we have just gotten news within the last hour that there is an agreement to avert a partial shutdown that could have begun midnight Friday. 6 bills: Ag, FDA, Commerce, Justice and Science, Energy, Interior, Transportation, HUD, Military Construction, VA, all will be fully passed by March 8th now. This next batch of 6 bills, March 22nd. So another short-term continuing resolution is what congressional leadership has decided here. Will you vote for it? Will it pass?
Well, we haven't seen the text of the bills yet. The minibuses are an insult to the American people. We've just gotten back from over a week's out of session, out of Washington, D.C. American people deserve better than this. You wouldn't run a peanut stand over how Congress is trying to do the national budget. So I will look at it, but most likely I won't. None of the riders that we submitted from the Freedom Caucus were agreed to. Cuts in this city are non-existent, which is a sad day for America. The fact that we do everything to avoid a shutdown. Well, the government's going to experience a national shutdown if we keep going with the debt that's accumulating in America today. So we'll look at the text. Again, it's one crisis to the next. It doesn't have to be this way. And no business would do this, no family budget would operate like this, but we'll look at it. As you say, the 2 deadlines have been extended from March 1 to the 8th, and then the next tranche from 11th to the 22nd. We need to be up here working, trying to get together, have a meeting of the minds, but it doesn't look like that's going to be possible.
If it's not possible, then, Congressman, just shut the peanut stand down?
Absolutely. You don't operate out of fear. We know we can't continue like we're going. I've heard numbers from the interest alone that's going to exceed the national defense budget of $862 billion yearly. But again, the American people deserve better than this. And if you're scared, then if you're scared of a shutdown, then I guess we're just going to wait till the permanent shutdown occurs. But we've got the only thing this administration has done, I guess if you can call it right, is to give us things to cut. The FBI building, the 87,000 IRS agents, you go down the list that we can offset funding items, and we're just not doing that. And it's it's very frustrating to those of us who want to try to get this nation on a firm financial footing, and it's not happening now. Kicking the can down the road is not going to work. Hasn't worked in the past, it's not going to work now.
So you say absolutely shut it down if necessary. The Speaker, though, Mike Johnson, has made it pretty clear that he would not like to see the government shut down. Is he at risk as consequence of putting forward another continuing resolution? Would someone within the House Freedom Caucus, for example, move on a motion to vacate?
I'm not going to go there. Mike is a good man. I support him for Speaker. He's honest. He tells us the lay of the land. But at some point, we're going to have to face the reality that we can't keep running from something that the Senate's not going to approve. The President is going to veto it. I get that. But the House is the House. We're in charge of the purse strings. And at some point, we're going to have to to realize that what we submit needs to be a conservative number. The $1.59 trillion really has no recourse for paying interest. It's just kicking the can down the road, and the continuing resolutions and the minibuses are part of that, and it shouldn't be. So, we're continually stressing to Mike that under any agreement ought to be firm metrics to stop the border hemorrhaging that's occurring. And we can't keep going with letting everybody from over 160 countries come into America, terrorists included. We don't know who's here. And that was the hill to die on, and I continue to back him up on that. That is the hill to die on. In any agreement on any of the 12 approach bills ought to have that rider. You either stop the flow of the immigrants or we're at a standstill. And we'll continue to stress that with him.
Congressman, this is all happening against the backdrop of a presidential campaign that's actually going to bring both Joe Biden and Donald Trump to the border tomorrow. We're approaching Super Tuesday, coming off the contest in your home state of South Carolina. Today, Republican presidential candidate Nikki Haley talked about this. In fact, I want to bring it back to what she said in Charleston after losing her home state's primary over the weekend. And we'll get you to reflect. Here she is.
Today in South Carolina, we're getting around 40% of the vote. That's about what we got in New Hampshire, too. I'm going to count it. I know 40% is not 50%, but I also know 40% is not some tiny group. There are huge numbers of voters in our Republican primaries who are saying they want an alternative. I said earlier this week that no matter what happens in South Carolina, I would continue to run for president. I'm a woman of my word.
So she's still in the race, Congressman, and you are the only member of Congress right now backing Nikki Haley. I know this is a hometown play for you, but you are now the face of the opposition to Donald Trump in Congress. Are you still comfortable with that?
Look, competition is good. I don't care that I'm the only one. I knew that going into it. I don't put my finger in the air when I endorsed her back in February of 2023. Look, she had 2% rating, no money, and look where she beat 12 other candidates, and she's now one of two. Let's let the American people decide. And the only one that is going to decide, that's going to tell us when she is in or out, is Nikki Haley. She collected $1 million after the ballot in South Carolina, which, she didn't lose by 30 points. She lost by 20. I congratulate President Trump. But look, what's going to change if Nikki gets out? She definitely couldn't win then. She will, as she said, she went through Michigan, she'll go through Super Tuesday, and then she will evaluate it. But it's up to Nikki Haley to depend on what she does. And yes, the election will still be November 5th of 2024. The calendar of events will stay the same, and she will decide whether it's worth continuing. She owes that to the people who have given her money. And the two things that normally happen when candidates get out of the race, one, the funding dries up, or two, the support dries up. And she's been very fortunate with that. And so, yes, I'm with her as long as she wants to be. This is not a negative to me. This is not something that you ought to rush to. You get other people say get her out. It's up to Nikki Haley what she wants to do. She's the one that's getting up from dawn to dusk, that's working that period of time. She's the one that's raising money, and we'll let it play out. Let the American people be the judge, not the pundits, not the media, not those who say her political career is over.
So, Congressman, you say you're with her so long as she's in this race. If she, say, gets out of the race after Super Tuesday, will you join the majority of your Republican colleagues in Congress and throw your support instead behind Donald Trump?
110% behind Donald Trump. I will call him, as I did before I endorsed Nikki Haley. I respect the man. Look what he did the 4 years he was there. I will always be appreciative of what this man did, what Donald Trump did for the Supreme Court, for conservative values, for securing the border. It's a train wreck. And I'll support him 100%, and I will call him if Nikki gets out and say whatever I can do in Congress, I will support him 110%.
We appreciate you spending some time with us, Congressman, on what I know is a pretty busy day in the House of Representatives. Welcome back to Washington. Ralph Norman of South Carolina with us. This evening on Bloomberg. Coming up, we'll take a deeper dive on the Supreme Court's decision to take up Donald Trump's immunity claim from prosecution. That just breaking this hour. And Dave Aronberg, the state's attorney with Palm Beach County in Florida, will be with us next. This is Bloomberg TV and Radio.
After all this time, I still get a thrill walking into the Capitol, and especially on this venerable floor, knowing that we, each of us, have the honor to represent our states and do the important work of our country. But Father Time remains undefeated. I'm no longer the young man sitting in the back, hoping colleagues would remember my name. It's time for the next generation of leadership.
Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell on an historic day on Capitol Hill, making it clear he will step down from his party's leadership post after the November election, ending a record tenure in that position. And joining us now, our political panel, Sarah Chamberlain is with us, Republican Main Street Partnership President and CEO, alongside Christy Setzer, the President Founder of New Heights Communications. Great to have you both here. We have a lot to talk about, but we may as well start here. This is pretty remarkable. If you could bring some perspective on the end of the longest-serving leader in the Senate and a Republican Party that we keep hearing all day has moved away from him. How do you look at it?
It's a very sad day, but I honor what he's done over the last 17 years. He's been a wonderful leader, very well respected. And he's right. Father Time is caught up, and it's time for him to move on. And the next person will be a gentleman by the name of John, the way this is going.
I think so, huh?
I think so.
One of three.
Yes, one of three.
Barrasso, Corn, and Thune, are you betting on a horse at this point?
Not yet.
Too early?
Too early.
And you think, despite the fact that there's been a lot of talk about this now being Trump's Republican Party, that a legacy politician such as those would be able to get adequate support to be Republican leader versus someone like Senator Rick Scott, who has also suggested he would throw his hat back in the ring?
Well, Rick Scott will not get it. It will be one of the Johns. One of the men by the name of John is a better way to say that. But it would be one of them. I would be shocked if it was Rick Scott.
Because, we've been hearing today as well is that this is the next step to the Senate becoming the House. And you have a sense of what's going on in the House.
Oh, we cannot have that.
You don't look at it that way.
Okay, we cannot have the chaos in the Senate that's going on in the House. So we have to pray that does not happen. And it won't happen. The Senate's a little different. It's not as close. I mean, the House is a very tough place. I mean, and the Speaker's doing the best job he can, but it's difficult. I mean, I've never seen it like this before.
So in the House and in the Senate, it seems that leaders in both chambers, Christy, have now made an agreement on how to avoid a government shutdown that could have begun at the end of this week. It's going to be another continuing resolution. This will be the fourth time, by my count, that the can has been kicked down the road, now to the 8th and 22nd of March. Is this going to pass?
Yeah, I mean, this is how it's going to be. And I think actually both of us have been on this program before and predicted exactly this, that we have seen this movie before. They take it right to the very end, and then they somehow come up with sort of a half deal, and that's obviously what happened here, too. I think what's important to not forget in all of this is that it doesn't have to be this way. And it's not usually this way. It has become this way because of the MAGA extremists in the House and somewhat in the Senate, but largely in the House, who have been holding up what is a quite reasonable budget that would fund veterans and law enforcement and border security and all of the things over restrictions on abortion and feeding women and children. So it's, again, another good example of how out of step the House, which, again, we can't let the Senate become either, is with most American voters.
Does Mitch McConnell making this decision public today make it more difficult for Joe Biden at a similar age to continue his argument against the age question? He's going to stand up in front of a joint session next week to deliver a State of the Union address, and I suspect it'll include a tribute to Mitch McConnell. Wouldn't you as well?
Yeah, I would. Although actually, if you looked at the statements that were put out by both Schumer and Nancy Pelosi today, they did sort of the bare minimum to be nice about his years of service. So, yeah, I suspect that Joe Biden will do the same. Of course, he will say nice things in a polite way and not go overboard on it. I think that the comparison on age is is obviously fair. But I think that the real thing that is happening here, in addition to the fact that, sure, Mitch McConnell is old, he is in failing health, he's been struggling with that for quite some time, and also he's not so different from other Republicans who have stepped down in the Trump era because they haven't worked in lockstep with Trump. And so that, I think, is what ultimately sort of tarnishes the legacy, is the fact that that is the position that he's been forced into at the end of a 40-year career.
I would just point out that in the statement the White House did put out about McConnell's announcement,
lovingly about him.
The president says, "I'm proud that my friend Mitch McConnell and I have been able to do that." And by that, he's saying bridging differences on different points of views for many years, working together in good faith, even though we have had many political disagreements. Just on the subject, though, of political disagreements, Sarah, I want to put the funding question to you, too. We have this deal. Does it get through the House? And does Mike Johnson get it through the House safely?
The CR deal?
Yes.
Yeah, so
when he said no more CRs and all of that.
Well, you know, it's very difficult. You know, you do have an extreme part of the Republican Party that does not really want to govern. They like to tweet. They like all of that. They
you
like
heard
chaos.
Ralph Norman said, absolutely, shut it down just now.
I know, but you can't, because it really hurts the American people. We never win when there's a shutdown. You never win. So, yes, he will get this through, and he will stay the Speaker as well.
Bring us into the State of the Union next week. The optics are going to be wild here. We do have a deal to avoid a shutdown, so I guess Joe Biden won't be talking about that. Is this going to be heckling, booing, half the room up, half the room down?
Well, there's always half the room up and down. Of
course. Forget that
right.
part, maybe. Although I think we might see, in some cases, progressives sitting down when he talks about Israel.
I agree.
And Republicans not all standing up at the same time either.
I agree with you. I mean, President Biden has his problems as well from the far left. I mean, everybody focuses on our far right, but there is a far left that came out in, you know, great numbers in Michigan to send him a message.
That's correct.
So, you know, everybody focuses on our extremes, but, you know, the Democratic extremes are sitting right there.
I'm really glad you brought that up, Sarah, because, Christy, we can't let you go without asking you about what happened in Michigan yesterday. Over 100,000 Democratic voters choosing uncommitted instead of President Biden. And what's noteworthy is it wasn't even just in places like Dearborn, where we know there's a heavy concentration of Arab and Muslim Americans, East Lansing, Ann Arbor, big college towns. Is this really a young people problem for the president?
Initially. But to keep it in perspective, he ultimately got 13% were voted uncommitted. Yeah. As you guys know, in 2012, there was no campaign for uncommitted, and Barack Obama faced a 10% uncommitted vote. I understand that the raw number is higher this time, but I think it does show, actually, to Biden and his administration and the campaign that this is something that they're going to need to address. I think what is positive for them is that if you listen to the interviews that are given by a lot of the leaders of the Listen to Michigan movement, what they basically said is, look, we want to be heard right now. We understand they are ultimately going to vote for Biden in the general, but it is important that he addresses this issue now. And I think
will they, though? They might not vote for Trump, but might they just decide not to vote at all?
I think a small minority will either stay home, vote third party, do something else. I think for the most part, this is also a very, very long time from now, right? There's many, many opportunities for ceasefire, for changes in geopolitics between now and then. And I do think that most will come home to the Democratic Party.
You both predicted on this program that we would avoid a shutdown, right? I know you did. You did as well. Congratulations. Thank you for keeping us honest. Sarah Chamberlain, Christy Setzer, with great insights, as always, on Bloomberg. We thank you. Our other big story breaking this hour, the Supreme Court saying late this afternoon, less than an hour ago, that they will rule on Donald Trump's bid for immunity from criminal prosecution. We'll hear arguments in late April as his trial remains on hold now. The Jack Smith case here in Washington. Let's bring in Dave Aronberg, Palm Beach County State Attorney, for his insights on this. Dave has been very helpful helping us understand each step of the way here. It's good to see you. Dave, welcome back to Bloomberg. Does this allow, now we're stepping into April here, would it still allow time for that trial to take place before the election, presumably?
I'm an optimist, but I'd say it's unlikely. The Supreme Court has stepped in when they didn't have to. The D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals gave a very extensive ruling on presidential immunity. The Supreme Court could have just deferred to them or could have just taken it up on a more limited basis. Because, I mean, this decision did not have to be put on hold waiting for the trial. So that's what's happening right now. There's a stay not just a review. So everything is being put on hold. And I think that really does a disservice to our democracy, because the voters need to know what's going to happen to this case before they make a decision in November.
Yeah. Well, Dave, we spoke with many legal experts, such as yourself, when Trump was initially arguing this immunity from prosecution case before the appeals court. And many of them said that the court was highly unlikely to even question immunity, to just go with the lower court ruling, say, no, you are not immune from prosecution, and be done with it. Does the fact that they have decided to hear this case indicate that they may be more sympathetic to Trump's argument than perhaps we previously thought?
Well, I was one of those so-called experts who said the Supreme Court is not going to review this case. They're just going to defer, and then it's game on in D.C. But I was wrong. I didn't expect the Supreme Court to sink lower in public opinion than it has already. And by taking this up, I think that they look like a partisan body, and that's a shame, because there's no reason to take this up, but they are. And I don't think it means they're going to actually overturn the decision. I mean, to believe that a president or a former president enjoys unlimited immunity, a get-out-of-jail-free card that allows you to assassinate his political rivals and get away with it, is laughable. So that's why I was surprised they took this up, but they are.
Wow. Dave, what does this mean for the other trials, and specifically in New York, the Alvin Bragg hush money case? That means that will start on time now. Can we confirm that?
Yeah, it means it's the only case that will be decided before the election unless something unusual happens. But it looks like the only information that voters will have over whether the former president committed any crimes will be in that case. That trial will go, and it'll be the only one. And it is the 4th out of 4 as far as the strength of the case for prosecutors. But it doesn't mean it's a weak case. It's just not one that has a lot of resonance with the American public, unlike, for example, the cases involving January 6th, which is what the Supreme Court just seemed to put the kibosh on for now.
Well, Dave, it's also worth noting in your neck of the woods down in Florida, where Trump is facing the classified documents case, he also has tried to claim immunity from prosecution there. Do these cases have bearing on one another? Does the court saying I'm going to, or they will hear this argument in April, have implications for how that's likely to be handled in Florida? Are there crosses here?
If the Supreme Court decides that the former president has complete immunity, then it would hurt the cases that are pending. The case in D.C. It would hurt the case involving Mar-a-Lago documents, although I still don't see how they can rule that way, especially because when it comes to the Mar-a-Lago documents case, most of Trump's actions in that case occurred after he was president. So it's one thing even to give a president some level of immunity from criminal prosecution, but a former president, that means that after he gets out of office, he can drive around the streets of Palm Beach County running people over and say, hey, immunity. That doesn't work like that.
If he gets reelected, Dave, classified documents case, none of the rest of them ever happen, right?
If he gets elected again to the White House, then he will inform his attorney general to shut down all the cases. So all the federal cases will go bye-bye. As far as the state cases, they will remain. The New York case verdict will remain, and the Fulton County case, if that ever happens now, Joe, that will go on. But what will happen, I think, is that Trump will be in the Oval Office, surround himself with Secret Service, and then dare local prosecutors to come get him. There would be a constitutional crisis. So this is the reason why Trump is running for president again. He wants to avoid any legal repercussions for his actions, and it may work.
Well, never any drama around here. Dave Aronberg, great to have you in the clutch here, Dave. We really appreciate that with the story breaking this hour. Thanks for being with us on Balance of Power. Check out the Washington Edition newsletter on the terminal and online. You've got a lot of reading to do tonight, Kaylee. It's been quite a day.
It's been quite a day. From Mitch McConnell to a funding deal to the Supreme Court and former President Donald Trump. There's never a shortage of news here in Washington.
True.
So thank you for joining us on Balance of Power as we try our best to break all of it down for you. We'll be trying again tomorrow, so come back and see us then on Bloomberg Television and Radio.